Hey everyone, welcome to the Crypto Drum Circle special episode on UFOs. Today it's me, Ariel, Kurt, Anastasia, and a special guest star, Cougar Bait. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and without further ado, here it is.
Aliens.
About some aliens.
Not necessarily aliens, right? UFOs.
UFOs, aliens.
I'm sure. Yeah, all of it.
Yeah. So, Anastasia, do you want to tell us about Mark Passio's research into the Anunnaki again?
Yes. Okay. So Mark Passio is this brilliant researcher from Philly. He's a very big freedom guy, etc. He used to be a priest for the Satanic Church for about 10 years. And with his tenure...
Just to clarify, are you talking about the Church of Satan founded by Anton Szandor LaVey, or are you talking about a different satanic church?
No, I'm talking about that one.
That's the Church of Satan. Okay, yeah.
The Church of Satan. I don't know. Do they all have like different names and different meanings? Like I figured.
Well, I just thought it's worth clarifying because that's the most well-known one. Maybe there are other ones. Yeah, but yeah, go on.
Yeah. There's that one that's actually a libertarian organization, but they call themselves the Satanic Church or something like that, just to be ironic. I don't know, but you're right. Yeah, it's LaVey's church. So Mark Passio was a priest in that church for 10 years. And then he realized that they were doing all of this really barbaric and satanic and terrible stuff at the higher levels. So he quit and started exposing them. And he's a big researcher of esoteric stuff. He knows a lot about, Egyptian culture and biblical information and just in general, has been researching human history for a really long time. And one of the things that he talks about is the Anunnaki, which are supposed to be the aliens who created humanity, and that they came down here and they were looking for, gold and other resources. And they decided to, do experiments with the Neanderthal, human race that was down here. And combine them with their own DNA and create these humans that could then serve them on this planet. And basically, they basically wanted to create a slave race out of humanity, and give them consciousness or whatever. So the theory goes that the people who started kind of painting in the French caves and became this creative human race actually came from these aliens, and that the snake in the Garden of Eden really refers to kind of one of these creatures that that had set humanity on this path. They're also people also refer to them as lizard people, et cetera, and it gets into these really, really crazy conspiracy theories. But the fact remains that when we're looking at Sumerian texts and when we're looking at Egyptian hieroglyphics, we can see these beings that are depicted as giants compared to regular people. And the Egyptians treat them as gods. So those kind of things that you see in history and in the past point to this race of beings that used to be on the planet and that used to be worshipped and that used to be greater and bigger and smarter and faster than humans, which is why they were treated like gods.
Yeah, so I do remember when I went to an exhibit about ancient Egypt, they had the reliefs and statues of Akhenaton, and he's depicted very differently to other Egyptian pharaohs or kings. And he has a long face and a large skull, and I've heard people say that that's evidence that he wasn't actually human, or he wasn't entirely human.
Right, and don't they find different types of skulls from that time period as well? Some of which they don't really understand how they can be humans.
Right. Yeah, I have heard that, especially about skulls in Peru, and people even claim they've done DNA tests and discovered that they're not human. But I don't know how to confirm that.
Anastasia, how did you come across Mark? Because I don't think he's necessarily known for that particular branch of research.
Yeah, I came upon Mark for like natural law and freedom stuff. I think I don't remember how it exactly happened, but he was extremely influential in my journey to anarchy a couple of years ago. And then he's Philly based, which is where I'm originally from. So I got to meet him there at his Fake Ass Christians seminar. And that's when he kind of went into a lot of the Anunnaki stuff, a lot of looking at the Bible as a historical record of humanity in a different way than most, the most religious people look at. So, and then I met him in Philly, and he's a good friend, and I really love all of his work a lot. So, and I trust him because, like, I like talking to him, I understand, like, why would somebody lie about that? Why would somebody spend their entire life researching these things and then, just for the giggles, kind of? He's definitely not that kind of person.
Yeah, that's awesome. You got to go to some of his talks. He's a very powerful speaker. Are you guys familiar with him, Kurt, Ariel?
Yeah, I haven't heard a whole lot of it, but I think I've seen a couple of interviews.
Yeah, because he's done a fair amount of interviews, but I think he's best known for his lectures. He hasn't written anything. He does have a podcast. He's done a few hundred episodes. It's mostly natural law focused. It's anarchism. If you're going to generalize it, it's interesting though. I would say he's probably, for how grounded and clear his message is, I feel like he's one of the most controversial people out there, period.
Totally.
He has a very strong sense of speaking, and he puts all these disclaimers before a lot of the things he says because he offends so many people. But yeah, he just has an amazing approach. I wish he would write a book or build out some more written material just to see where he gets some of the information from, because the way that he presents it, it makes it seem like he understands it really well, but you don't always get a clear idea of exactly what pieces he's putting together.
Well, one of the things that he offers is what's called an ARC, and an ARC is like, I think he asks for a 5 gigabyte hard drive, and you can actually just send it to him in Philly, and he'll fill it up with all of the research that he's been collecting off of the internet since the internet came about. Like him understanding how government works even back then. He knew that a lot of this information, a lot of these documents that were being uploaded to the internet in the early days would eventually start disappearing, through censorship and the people trying to control the information that we're seeing on the internet. So he started collecting articles and books that were put on the internet, and basically all of the information that was coming out, and he puts it on this ARC hard drive and sends it out to people completely for free. So all you have to do is just pay shipping, there and back, and he'll show you exactly where he found all of this data. And then you walk into his house, and he just has books upon books upon books of magic and esoteric stuff, and aliens and UFOs and Egyptian culture and Sumerian texts, and all of these. He, like, during his presentations, he'll tell you exactly which books. Like the Book of the Dead is a big source that he draws from. But he'll tell you all the big and important books throughout human history that have this information that we're just not really taught this information in public schools or private schools. Our parents don't know about it. It's kind of information that's been lost over the centuries, and only the ones who really look for and like dig for that information actually find it. But it's out there.
So, Anastasia, do you believe this version of history that includes the Anunnaki, or do you think it's just you're not sure about it, or you think it's just an interesting story, or what?
I don't know. I'm kind of like on pause on the whole situation. I think it definitely is a very compelling version of history, but I'm not particularly sure how how true it is. I don't know. There's definitely things like pointing to it. Like he talks about how the Anunnaki are supposed to be blue-blooded, and that they basically, created kind of one set of humans that were the slave race, and then another set of humans that had a little bit more of their intelligence or whatever, and a little bit more of their ruthlessness too, and created kind of the royal races, the monarchic races of history, the kings and queens, which is why it was so important for them to, like this ideology of having to pass down power through your bloodline. And then
marrying your cousins.
Yeah. And then being blue bloods kind of has that idea of, they're kind of reptilian and cold-blooded, and that they're the ones who are ruling over the entire human race in the absence of these aliens. And that I don't know, that to me kind of feels a little true in some ways. And then there was this other book that I read, the Book of Ameria, I think it was, or something like that. And it talks about how instead of like meeting, this metaphorical snake in the garden, Eve actually had, like, Adam and Eve were technically already aliens from some other place. And they had come to cultivate Earth and, protect it and, watch over all of these animals, etc. And then this reptilian race came down, and Eve had met one of their leaders, and he had tricked her, and not tricked her the way in the Bible of like eating the fruit of, the tree of knowledge, but tricked her into maybe losing Earth in a battle or in some kind of war or in some kind of, fraudulent contract or agreement that she had set up with these creatures behind like Adam's back. So just because you see this story repeated in all of these different sources that you kind of stumble upon, I do think there's some validity to it, but honestly, like I don't think I have enough information to be able to make that decision, on top of trying to get through all of my, regular kind of like societal, confirmation of information that I've known since I was little, right? Adam and Eve have always been humans created by God. But then you read Robert Monroe, who I've talked about on this show before, and he talks about how he meets aliens while he's astral projecting, and these aliens tell him that no, actually Earth was created by this one God who's not like the source God, but is some kind of higher, demigod, some kind of higher power, higher creature from basically outer space, right? Because everything that's not on Earth is from outer space, and he's the one, who actually created this planet. So like these tiny little pockets of information that you find in different sources make you go, huh? But can we prove it?
Without meeting one of these Anunnaki, probably not.
Right, exactly.
It's, I guess, like as someone who hasn't researched it much and doesn't know much about it, like just like hearing all this, like it almost makes me wonder, like it's just all these like elaborate mythologies. Like I can't imagine there's evidence for every element of it, even if like some elements might seem to have like a little bit of evidence. And it's just like, I guess I kind of like, I'm not totally invested in the idea of researching this a whole bunch or putting a whole bunch of time into it, because I just feel like there's just so many more like stuff, like when it comes to like UFOs, like there's like even like these big mythologies and UFOs, like it seems to me there's so many more like parsimonious, simple explanations that could encapsulate the data without me having to like alter my worldview in any major way. And I guess I'm just asking you guys, because I know you guys are all more into it than I am. Like, let's say coming back to UFOs, I know Cougar Bait on your website is a little bit about this. Like, why shouldn't I just say to myself, like, okay, UFOs are just people who are wrong or hallucinating or just mistaken in some way, people like these UFO sightings, and just like dismiss it and go on with my life? Like, why shouldn't I just do that?
I mean, I would say because there is evidence that that the phenomena isn't explainable, and that there's this big asterisk, there's this big variable. We don't know what the types of explanations for certain cases or events are so strange or out there that they warrant further investigation. So it's very compelling. Like it's a profound mystery. It's not there are lots of cases, thousands, that they're, despite ardent, repeated investigation and with accompanying forms of data, whether it's radar data or multiple witnesses, or repeated events within a specific context or official response, there's an aggregate of them. And I think because there is still this big asterisk at the center, like when we're talking about a UFO, we don't know what it is. There's definitely something there that I guess I think there isn't a very, I don't think it takes too many steps to sort of reach the critical mass of data or evidence looking at the cases to see that, okay, well, this is strange. And the trouble is there's still a lot of mystery within that. Like I don't have a lot of things that there's not a smoking gun that I can point at and say specifically this one thing, because a lot of the examples that I have are things that aren't explained because we're talking about UFOs. I can get into like the abduction literature and research, or personal experiences or individual cases that I think are compelling for specific reasons. But I think more what's valuable to someone in your position is that it is the aggregate, and then presenting a series of cases that they sort of cascade and maintain this frame of, I don't know what the hell that is. There are quite a few of those, and there are a lot of good examples, and not even just in America, all over the world. So
yes,
I think one of the other challenges though is to get into those, and then to even just have a conversation about it requires a lot of detail, and it's best done in a written context. So I can give you some generalizations and talk about those, but I don't know if you could really convince someone or sort of push them into the pool just through conversation alone. They would need to pick up a book and go through with a researcher or historian's sort of hand and look at the material and ascertain all of the factors that were involved in those individual cases. Because when we're talking about something we can't explain, a lot of it is eliminating what it's not, and then zeroing in very, very, very carefully on what we can determine. And the cases where that's most apparent, like there's the most value, it's still really complex. And especially in the ones where when there was some form of official response, like in the form of government, you can tell they don't know either. And they're just trying to sort of control or manage the public's response because they don't want to be seen as impotent to the threat. I mean, it's a threat. I mean, UFOs, their very nature are they are dangerous to the American or any military's perceived superiority and our sense of safety. So, in order, I think, for them to maintain that, they have sort of a line they have to toe, and so they keep themselves distanced from it. And so, it's also been ridiculed and sort of demeaned and pushed down in academia. It's very controversial. So you also have a culture where it's difficult for people in positions of authority or with the skills necessary to investigate it. At least I think post like 70s, it's gotten harder and harder to attract those people. And so you either have a lot of outliers, a lot of crazy people, or people like me that have no scientific background at all that are just trying to figure out which way is up. So what do you guys think? Or how would you answer that question if someone has that position?
Well, I got a couple of notes on that. So one, UFO skeptics will normally say something like, oh, well, 95% of those cases are things that are perfectly explainable, like a meteor or a Jupiter or other star or something. And it's true. So somewhere between 80% and 95% of those cases are absolutely explainable, and we pretty much know what they are, and they don't really warrant further investigation on the UFO front. But the other 5 to 20% of cases are the genuine UFOs. And so there's the French organization GEPAN, and they publish all of their UFO reports on the internet. And it does normally come up like something between 5% and 10% of those final the Class D, I think they call it. So they have Class A where they're like, well, we have enough information, and we'll say it's like 99% it's this thing. And then you go down until it's Class D, and it's like, we have enough information, but we have no idea what this thing is. And those are the cases which are really interesting. And the other thing you mentioned about the culture, so I recommended this book to Ariel for UFOs. What's it called? UFOs. Generals, pilots, and government. Yeah, Leslie Kean, exactly. Generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record by Leslie Kean, and she talks, or the reports from these pilots talk about the difference in culture in the US and the UK. So in the US, they can't talk about UFOs. So if they mention to their boss, I saw something once, the boss will be like, really? Because it'd be a shame if we had to let you go. Whereas in the UK, if they see something in the sky, they will definitely report it because they know it could potentially cause a collision. So in the US, it's like, yeah, they still have this, I guess it's a culture that stems from the Cold War or something. They don't, like you were saying about military threats, they don't want anybody to think that Russians or anybody has anything over the US military.
What about you, Anastasia?
Well, I mean, I agree with that position. I think, but then again, I don't think you need to do that much research to just, if the question that you're trying to answer, are UFOs like related to aliens, or are there aliens out there? Then I think that you don't have to dig very deep to find out that there are cases where, there's obviously beings that are not human, that do not have human technology, that do come and visit us once in a while. Like one of the ones that was just declassified, I think last year, it was like a huge deal, was that video from the Air Force, where the guys are just sitting there, and at that point they had, kind of like older camera technology, so you couldn't see everywhere around, but you could see right in front of their airplane, and they're just talking about it, and they're like, you can see like one little ship, and you hear the officers looking at each other and being like, holy crap, there's a whole fleet of them, and obviously, like, really, like, in the dark, they're obviously soldiers, they're obviously terrified out of their mind that they're in a plane surrounded by a fleet of like spaceships and UFOs and whatnot. And if for somebody the criteria to believe in aliens and believe in their technology and that they visit the earth is government approval, well then there you go. That's just one of the cases that has already been declassified. And I know that there is a lot of people from the space program that come out of the space program and retire and then kind of blow the lid on all of the stuff that they had been researching and had been encountering during their time in the military. I'm not familiar with all of their names, but anytime that I talk to people who kind of have researched the UFO phenomenon, they always have a bunch of names that were ex-military guys that come out and really talk about this stuff. I think something Greer or Green was one that I last heard. And I know Mark Passio is friends with a UFO
Sorry, were you talking about Stephen Greer?
Yeah, that one, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know much about him or anything, but I know that there are people that come out of the military and start declassifying this information and talk about it, and to not take whistleblowers at their word mostly, I think is silly. I mean, definitely, you definitely have to verify what they say, but whistleblowers don't just come out with information like that because it's going to make them rich and famous. It's, they go through a lot of bullshit to be able to talk about the stuff that they talk about and the secrets that they expose. So just by that nature, yeah.
I think some of them do become famous. I think there are a few examples of people that are extremely controversial because their testimony is purely anecdotal and they are making a lot of money. Corey Goode's probably the best example right now. And his story is so out there. It's so captivating, and he's such a good witness. I have trouble figuring out if he's lying or not. Anecdotal. He doesn't have any evidence to back up his claim, but the types of things that he talks about, I mean, there's a comic book. I mean, that's how detailed and visual.
Sorry, you said his name is Corey Goode?
Yeah, Corey Goode, yeah. He's a whistleblower. He was made popular through David Wilcock, who's a researcher, and they created a TV show for Gaia TV over the last few years, where it's just David interviewing Corey for hours and having him tell about his work as a intuitive empath for some sort of clandestine space force on Mars and galaxy. Oh yeah, no, I would stay far away from the rabbit hole there. He's someone that I've seen draw the biggest lines at conventions, and he's absolutely there's a cultural zeitgeist around him in terms of the phenomena. And I think the video you're referencing is the Nimitz UFO, or the Tic Tac UFO from the ATIP video that To the Stars released late last year. But there wasn't any indication of what the object was. It was all infrared footage from one of the aircraft that were following it, but it really is just a UFO. It's a good UFO, because you can hear them talking about what the hell it is, and they don't know. But that was it, really. There wasn't any implication or connection.
What would be other logical conclusions to a fleet of tiny ships if the conclusion was not somebody outside of the human race? I mean, I guess the logical argument could be made that maybe there are civilizations on Earth that we're not aware about, right? Like, as much as there are very primitive tribes that still exist undetected in some of the jungles, all over Earth, there might be civilizations that have really, really, advanced technology that don't really want the rest of us to know about them too. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about that or researched if that's even a valid theory.
Yeah, I think that's more is that the notion of kind of a breakaway civilization, or are you saying that there's a civilization that was pre-humans that sort of is still here?
Maybe both. But I just mean that, like, if the conclusion that when people bump into these UFOs that they might just be, a lot of them I think are military crafts, right? Just like regular military crafts that we're not aware that they have this technology. But then when the military is stomped and they're like, what is that? Well, then in that case, the question is this aliens, or maybe it's a different kind of civilization on Earth that have technology that's even better than what the military has?
I guess, like, one thing, like, what my mind goes to, just because, like, I've spent some time studying the mind, and I mean, this has come up a bit before on the podcast, but like, where I go and I hear some of these stories is like confirmation bias, confabulation. Like, there's like a ton of evidence. There's not a ton of evidence for aliens, but there's a ton of evidence that the human mind is very fallible, especially when it comes to acting as an eyewitness, when it comes to memory. Like, it's like, there's if there's a lot of evidence that, like, if there's a gap in your visual field, your brain will just come up with something to fill it. Or if there's a part of your memory that's like doesn't make sense, your mind will invent a story to make sense of what happened, even if it requires inserting things that weren't actually real, or like you saw a dog but it looked like a baby, or it, like, this kind of stuff is very, very well documented. There's a ton of psychological evidence for it. So when I hear, like, the soldiers, I like, how do I know? Maybe the soldiers got themselves worked up and like freaked out, like that's happened. It's like if you're in a scary house and you think you see a ghost, and you can work yourself up to things. And yeah.
I mean, that's definitely true. But I think in a lot of these cases, the evidence is really too overwhelming to just use that. That would be like dismissing the evidence. Because when you have these cases where there are 4 Air Force men and they come out and they happen to see an unidentified object and they're taking notes the whole time, so very, very meticulous documenting of what's going on. It's very difficult to just say, it's just a trick of the light or trick of the mind or something like that. I don't. It probably explains a lot of cases, but I don't think it explains even most of these, the truly unusual ones.
No, not even just notes. I mean, like if you use the Washington D.C. incident, there are multiple pilots from multiple airports, multiple ground control. You have air data, air radar data, and ground radar data, all reporting the same type and configuration of objects, traveling in the same trajectory, and behaving in a manner that is entirely unconventional and unexplainable. And they're all immediately trying to figure out what the hell it is. And then, jets are scrambled, and then within, then there's a repeat of the same events in the same area, in the same airspace, weeks after. They're in certain circumstances, there is that data. I think it is important to acknowledge that in an overwhelming percentage of the cases that there's a psychological factor, or in the context of any anecdotal or personal case that is just one individual or 2 individuals that have a pre-existing relationship, that those are huge factors.
Yeah.
But there are so many military and other cases that happen in a context where there is data. I mean, even if we're talking about the Nimitz video, there's a video of it. It's not, we're all looking at it. We're all trying to figure out what the hell it is. Doesn't mean it could be fabricated or it couldn't be something else, but I think we're, in those contexts, we're well past the sort of psychological or faults of memory. So I have to kind of keep it in that perspective, I think.
Yeah. One case, yeah. Oh, sorry, go on, Harry.
I was just gonna say, like, I guess it's like there's like the confabulation argument of like unreliable witness, which you guys kind of are addressing, which is good. And then there's the other kind of question I have, which is why I really appreciate your website, Cougar Bait, because I feel like you go through it well. But like, in terms of like the alien hypothesis, like even if we accept that there's like these UFOs and that some of the reports, some small minority of the reports are credible, and that those reports refer to an objective external phenomenon, like that doesn't necessarily mean that it's aliens. Like that, like there could be a ton of other explanations other than aliens, and this is where confirmation bias comes in, because I feel like if you become like too in love with the alien hypothesis, and like everything can seem like evidence for aliens.
So
actually,
yeah, but there aren't that many UFO enthusiasts, at least not that I'm familiar with, that there aren't that many who are like, yes, definitely aliens, couldn't have been anything else. No, that's
I think they definitely have a pretty strong community, though. Like they're their own little community, and they interact with each other and they share notes. And when people come in who say that they've been abducted, they'll like talk to them and like and vet them through it. And I've definitely heard some abductions that have been very traumatic, and some that were not. So yeah, I think there's a pretty solid community that researches UFOs and aliens. Not to mention the New Age part that kind of, I guess, goes the way that Cody does with the whole being an empath and third eye and seeing beings beyond the 3 dimensions. That, I mean, like at that point, like, do you call a ghost a human or an alien? Because ghosts are really nothing like us, at least in the physical. So how do we define these?
I think if someone's talking about it from a personal experience, they're going to use, within the context of the experience that they had, whatever seems appropriate within whatever the context of that interaction was. If it seemed like an alien, if we're going to talk about it where we're trying to ascertain objectively or see the phenomena and sift through some of the really strange aspects, it's just, I think the extraterrestrial hypothesis is just sort of this historical catch-all of the default explanation or our way of understanding it. So yes, there are all sorts of other potentialities. I mean, and they don't even have to be extraterrestrial, right? They could be interdimensional or some sort of like spiritual, demon or something, if you want to get ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. But I feel like then we're just sort of categorizing what the hypothesis could be. So the other aspect of that is just trying to dig into what the abductees are experiencing and what are the consistencies. Are there consistencies that are independent of background and cultural context or age or and I guess the best resource I know of at the moment is David Jacobs. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this guy. He's been writing books for a while. He's a psychologist who has been helping abductees try to understand their experience and sort of reclaim some of their experience, because one of the consistent components, it seems, from abductees is there are these aspects of missing time or altered memories or events or things that, like they'll be driving down a road by themselves, right? And then 2 hours will have elapsed and they'll be slightly further down the road, but they won't be able to account at all for this period of time. Or there are instances where people nearby will see people be abducted, right? And then those people won't have any memory of what had happened, but the observer that saw them being taken had some memory and can account for some parts of the experience. And this is all anecdotal, right? Other instances, people will come back with marks or scars on their body, or all the people that were around won't remember what happened, but only one person was taken. Anyway, the fascinating part about his research is that he's been, over the course of decades, trying to draw patterns from these abductees' experiences. And I think what's fascinating is in his own research, he's found some consistent aspects, but the narrative it paints is like very singular and lends to extraterrestrials. And I guess I could go into it, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with it at all. It still is based on anecdotal evidence, but he's done sessions with 1,150 patients over the course of a few decades. And he's written a number of books. I guess I'm only halfway through his most recent one, Walking Among Us. And it's fascinating. I think, especially the specific narrative that he's presenting there based on his research, but I think it's difficult to find people in that space that are doing that type of research, because it's very time intensive. You have to maintain like a really rigorous routine of questioning and not leading your witness or helping people trying to tell their story. Because in so many of the cases, it sounds like people are either their whole experience is removed and just nothing is put there, or they're given false memories. Whatever's on the other side of the phenomena is actively manipulating what is being given to them. And that, I think that idea alone just puts all of the other cases where people have some sort of interaction kind of into question, because then it's hard to tell who to trust or what is real, right? Mm-hmm. And it's hard to find those people that are doing that kind of research. But David Jacobs is, I guess, the only person I know that's doing it at the moment at that capacity. I don't know if you guys are aware of anyone else or if you're familiar with him.
No, but it sounds very interesting. But how do they determine that the memories were manipulated? Like, is it through hypnotic regression or some other method?
Yeah, it's hypnotic regression. He describes the way he asks questions. He doesn't use leading questions, and he uses he gives an example, and I'm certain he's gone into more detail in previous books. But it sounds like people will report. I mean, when you can't account for a period of time, or when there's someone there that says they saw something happen, right? Then you would kind of presume that they went somewhere. And then if you don't have any memory of it, but you have memory that there was a missing time, then the regression is mostly just trying to figure out what happened to that period. In terms of the screen memories, it sounds like through the regression they will get a clear picture of because it has to do with how discordant the screen memory is from the actual events. And I think that's kind of idiosyncratic to the particular person's particular experience.
So in
What
communion,
is screen memory?
Screen memory would be a memory that is implanted, so a false memory that has been introduced to cover up something an actual event.
yeah. So in communion, Strieber talks about where he'll have memories of just staring out the window, looking at an owl for hours time, and that's the screen memory. In Jacob's work, are the screen memories similar, or do they involve animals, or how are they?
I'm not as familiar with his other books, and this particular book is more going into specifically the sort of perceived continuity or agenda amongst all of the abductees and the program that they're essentially in. So it's not the only specific aspects he's addressed is that sometimes there's an aspect of feedback where the person will hear their own thoughts and think they're the things being sent to them, and so they'll sort of be generating kind of their own emotional experience. But he hasn't specifically gone into detail about those in this book. I know of a researcher who's written a book specifically about just owls. I think he's under Richard Dolan's press, and yeah, there's these weird instances where people will be driving around, right, and then they'll look and there'll be an owl in the car just looking at them, and then they'll have missing time, and they can't account for the rest of it. So like there's this weird, and it seems strange like why you would interject that in the form of a screen memory, but I don't know, it's hard to tell. I think it's hard to tell. There aren't a lot of good resources I found that try to correlate or draw some patterns between just the screen memories. But I also haven't fully dug into David Jacobs' work yet either.
I guess like this kind of reminds me of some of the conversations we're having in our psychedelic episode, because it's kind of a similar question of like if there's like this experience that's this experience of like a being or of some kind of form, and it's consistent across people, across culture, then like it seems to me that there's two general kinds of explanations that could be brought forward. Like one, the beings are real in an objective way, or two, they're real in an archetypal way, so they come from within. So like for example, like a Jungian explanation. So the idea of like, you know, like Anastasia was talking a bit before of the like cross-culturally, you see like ancient civilizations talking about these like giant beings that like had wisdom and guided humanity. So like there's you know, you could say, well, they were real, they were gods, they were aliens, so on and so forth. Like there's a common external objective experience, or you could say they were archetypally real. So something baked into the human psychology that goes way back into our biological nature that almost pre-programs us to have a tendency to like search for like these larger, higher beings, or like to like archetypes. Like we have like the archetype of like the mother figure and the archetype of the father figure, because biologically we have fathers and mothers, and that's like really ancient. So we project it onto the world, and like we see, you know, the moon is the mother and the sun is the father, and maybe if the archetypes exist on that level, it's entirely possible that like we're archetypally predisposed to seeing aliens, or to seeing like Mescalito, or to seeing the DMT elves. Like it could just be that our brain reacts a certain way under certain conditions.
I think unfortunately it wouldn't account for, at least if I'm just singling out Jacob's book and his work. It just, archetypes are too generalized to account for the minute details and consistencies across reports. So I'm not saying that those reports are real. It's just that it wouldn't be a good fit for that particular context, right? Like if they're seeing similar beings perform similar actions in a very specific way, and the appearances, because it's the thing, he has sort of a table of the types of beings. There's like 6 or 7 distinct forms. They're very consistent, where they're wearing the similar clothes in like the really minute details. And that's not even I guess I'm not trying to get too far into it, but there's a specific program that they're all taking part in. And so the types of behaviors that the others perform on them, and then the experiments that they're in, they're all like, it's just very singular, and the types of tools that are used and the procedures and how they're interacted with in terms of their body. Like it's too detailed. Like when I think of archetypes or an anima or animus, it's like there's this very clear representation of like these very profound archetypal energies, like masculine or feminine, or and I think, and I'm familiar with like, you know, DMT and self-transforming machine elves, and I've read quite a few trip reports. I haven't done DMT myself, but I see people try to describe similar things, and they seem, to me, they sound more archetypal, but they're also very much through the lens of that person's particular experience, and I can't account for just how powerful, DMT especially, how incredibly powerful that psychedelic is, and the complexity of whatever's going on in that person's head, and then their ability to actually translate it, because it sounds like there's just this huge spectrum that's lost when they come back, and their ability to remember and communicate the scope and breadth and nuance of what they're actually experiencing is difficult, at least with that substance, whether it's DMT or 5-MeO DMT. 5-MeO seems a little more, I don't find as many direct experiences with like the elves or something to that effect.
So Cougar Bait, do you think that the hypothesis that alien abduction experiences are actually caused by a spontaneous release of DMT in the brain, do you think that's credible?
I think I don't think so. I think the nature of the phenomena in a lot of instances it doesn't happen quickly enough, or that I feel like there would be too many other things that you could then that would cause that trigger. Like I don't think just because I'm seeing a triangle with 3 red lights that slowly approaches from the northeast, like is going to make my brain, you know, suddenly shoot out psychedelics. If we were trying to say that UFOs are like the archetypal expression of that chemical release, no, there's just too much variance. You know, there are too many people seeing it from 1,000 feet away to 500 feet away. It's intimately
Well,
close.
I was talking more about the abduction experience itself, not about the UFO. Like when you get into a room and there's doctors around you or something. Sure. You know,
I think it is so nuanced. I think the difficulty with it is, you know, when you're hearing a personal case, like it takes a lot of time to sift through the specific circumstance. Even before that, just finding the witness, like the person that's willing to talk about their experience and that has gone through whatever traumatic or controversial aspects, because that's the thing, that these people are ostracizing themselves just by putting themselves out there. I mean, you become completely, I think, typecast and stereotyped in a lot of ways. So finding those good stories, I think, is, like, for me, it's been the primary challenge. I mean, most of what I'm trying to do is just aggregate resources and figure out who isn't full of shit, who isn't trying to just make money off their story, you know, or who hasn't been caught up in it and their story has changed over time, because maybe initially they told a really good story and then there were inconsistencies, and who was willing to talk about it, and is it in English, and can I find it? That's tough. So I think someone like David Jacobs is pretty fascinating and a good source. I could cite other sighting accounts that I think are better examples, but there's still big asterisks in a lot of those. It's like, why did that happen, and why was it done in that particular way? It's hard to tell in a lot of them. So the Jacobs research is trying to say that there is an explanation, and it's very clear, but that's the only real, I want to say credible, but like what seems like a very well-researched perspective on that part of the phenomena.
Well, I just want to say that observational research, I think, is just as valid as, you know, putting chemicals in the Petrie dish and being like, this is, you know, this is what this is. Like, I think that observation over time is a wonderful way to prove or disprove a hypothesis. And I think, you know, Edgar Casey did this with diet. I think Robert Monroe did this with astral projection and near-death experiences. And if David Jacobs has been, you know, collecting these anecdotal stories that might not be seen as credible proofs, because like from individuals, because they're individual individual anecdotal stories, when you put them all together and you go through that research and you meticulously decide which questions you ask, and you know, stabilize the experiments by making all the questions to all of the people exactly the same, and you do these, you know, kind of like, you follow these scientific principles, I do think that that kind of observational research is credible.
Yeah, and I think the scientific aspects work best in the aggregate. I think it's when you get into the minutia of some of the individual stories that you have to sift through, I think, some of the more difficult aspects. And you know, this whole field is more like intelligence gathering or forensics, right? It's not anecdotal evidence is still evidence, like it's admissible in a court of law, but in a scientific context, it's not really enough to create a theory, right? Because when we move from a hypothesis to a theory, we're saying that we have something that we can base, we have a form of evidence that we can then test the theory against. Whereas a hypothesis, we're just saying, well, this is just kind of a potential explanation. Like, we don't really have a body of evidence that we can use to test against, but we think it, you know, it's a potential logical or other explanation for this particular phenomena, and we sort of try to zero in on which one we can build evidence around or figure out. And there aren't any theories, right, for UFOs. Like, otherwise it wouldn't be a UFO. There are definitely a lot of other things, and we talk about abduction research or individual sightings, but I think that part's a little more complicated and nuanced. I think it requires a lot more bandwidth, because if we're going to talk about we're spending time just talking about Corey Goode or just about David Jacobs' book. Even if Jacobs is doing an aggregate of 1,100 people, you kind of have to, at some point you have to kind of rest on someone's perspective and credibility, because I can't listen to thousands of hours of testimony and sessions from 1,100 people. But if that person's done a lot of good work and they're consistent about it, you know, and the dude, it's not like he's going gangbusters, making $1 million talking about it. I've been very interested in what he's had to say so far, but that part of it is still complex.
Yeah, so there's definitely like, there's some kind of weird phenomenon that's happening. Like, it's, I don't know, like, it just seems like, I mean, I hate to say it, but I guess like my third or fourth objection is like you guys ever watch the film Mysterious Skin?
No.
It's with Scarlett Johansson or someone else?
It's with what's his name? The guy who's in 500 Days of Summer, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Anyway, it's this film, and one of the characters in the film is this guy who's like obsessed with UFOs and had this abduction experience, and then it turns out to have been like an experience of like sexual abuse by a human that he like confabulated into an abduction experience. And I guess like when I hear kind of the structure of these abduction stories, like it kind of like, I know that's like a really like, you know, a dark place to go with all of it, but like it kind of sounds like, and that's kind of what happens like when someone has PTSD or they're traumatized, like it's easy to come up with this, like I think a lot of I'm not like people, I don't even think it's like a conscious thing. People are deciding I'd rather have been abducted by an alien and be like, you know, the special person that the special thing happened to. But like, I can see why someone subconsciously would like choose to interpret their experience in that, like even like ones that are credible and not lying and like had something happen and had real memory loss and saw an owl. Like I can still see how there could be a lot like more prosaic explanations. Like, and when you like mush together like confabulation, confirmation bias, archetypes, and like the prevalence of abductions and like weird traumatic things that happen just from like human cruelty or whatever, or even like medical trauma that happens all the time. Like I don't know. Like I'm again, it's like I think probably if I read the book, I guess I'd probably have a more nuanced perspective. But
yeah, well, I think that probably it likely does explain some alien abductee experiences. I mean, like I'd say almost for sure, some of them are just creations of somebody's mind that are trying to process some difficult trauma. But I don't. I mean, what we're talking about is a series of phenomena. So we're not just talking about alien abductions, and we're not just talking about UFOs. There are all these other, all of these phenomena together make me think that something weird is going on, and I don't know what it is, and I don't claim to know that it's definitely not just trauma. And I wouldn't rule that out, but it is a question, and it's not like we can just brush it to the side by saying, "Oh, well, it's probably trauma." No, we don't know.
if credible accounts have like the same, like very detailed, same consistent elements across cultures, then that's a good argument for there being either like an objective phenomenon or like a really sophisticated system of archetypes that's more sophisticated than we imagined it to be. That's kind of...
I mean, there's definitely a ton of stories that come out of Russia. I don't know them exactly. Like, again, I haven't really delved deep into this research. I just don't have the bandwidth for it, I guess. But Russia's a huge like UFO ground. It's a vast country with lots of like low population areas. But for whatever reason, like people still encounter these things. And my dad's encountered UFOs out like, on hunts, like driving in the dark in the middle of the night through some like desolate forest in between two little villages or something. And a lot of them have been things like electricity balls, right? Those are like a weather phenomenon that when you first see it, you're like, holy shit, what is that? But if you are not ignorant to that kind of information, then you automatically know like what to do. Like if you ever encounter a ball of lightning, you shouldn't move because it gets attracted to you and it can actually kill you. And like fireballs and weird aircrafts and et cetera, et cetera. He's never really said anything about encountering any kind of aliens. But ships and weather phenomenon, whether they're military or not, are very, very common out there. So I'm assuming if that's very prevalent in Russia, then it probably does, transfer across all different cultures and all different places, and not just the U.S. or North America.
And I would say I'm guilty of being mostly only familiar with American reports and events. The books that I have read that are more international are by Richard Dolan. He sort of goes through just decade by decade all of the notable historical cases. I think they are still mostly in America, but he does cover a lot of the international ones. But yeah, even those, they happen in the kind of their own context or zeitgeist, depending on what they are or what happened. Kurt, is this a subject you are familiar with, or I don't know what? I guess I'm curious what your background is with it, or if you read books, or.
Yeah. So, well, I mentioned that Leslie Kean book, which I think if anybody's interested in UFOs, I think that's the first book they should read.
Yeah, totally.
I'll just go through. There's some of these things that I was talking about in the Slack channel like last week. Like Stan Romanek, I know you probably know that case. So Stan Romanek is an interesting case. This guy, according to him, he's had these high weirdness events in most of his adult life. Like he supposedly has UFOs following him. He's a serial abductee. And he claimed at one point to have an implant in him, which they removed, but then it disappeared, which I find that rather suspicious. But the most interesting part of his case is where he has these physics formulae that is written during his sleep and is sent them to physics professors, and they're taking them seriously. So that's an interesting case. And then
the Romanek case is it's actually in the hoax section of my website. So he was found to have plagiarized an overwhelming majority of the equation, and then
I didn't know that.
Just to bullet through some of the other things. So if you look at the video where he shows the alien peeking through the window, I mean, it's the way that just the way that he presents everything, I think, is more demonstrative. Like, there's a good example of him in an interview throwing a pen over his shoulder and then treating it like there was like some strange event behind him that happened. Even if you watch there's a documentary on Netflix called Extraordinary, the Stan Romanek story. It sort of goes through everything, and then at the very end, they reveal that he's under charges for child pornography and currently like in the process of potentially going to jail. And not that, like, God forbid, just being a pedophile somehow discredits your UFO, your abduction accounts, but he just has this, and from my personal perspective, just in seeing him present, he feeds off of the attention, and he has just gradually, I think he may have had a genuine sighting. His first sighting was just off the road, just outside of Denver, and he just saw a UFO, he claimed, but then it just kind of spiraled from there. Like, the ante needed to, if you're in it for that, I think the ante keeps getting up. Like, you need to produce greater and greater claims of evidence or experience, and just kind of follows that trajectory. And it's just unfortunate now that he's apparently also a terrible person, and that I don't think he'll ever survive that. So unfortunately, he's not a good example, but he's gotten a lot of attention, and he did become knowledgeable enough about the phenomena to put his personal experiences in the context of he would give a historical overview of the phenomena. So he got a lot of attention for that, and was known also slightly as a ufologist, but also had personal experience, which is like a dangerous mix. It's like, okay, like, are you trying to justify your experience, or are you just full of shit and trying to pad that whole thing, or what? So sorry, I feel like you're going to add something else that you're
No, that's it. That's good. That's good analysis. I think Ariel appreciates that.
Cool.
I mean, I'm not attached to any outcome, but it's...
You're right. It's great. Yeah.
No. The video of him flicking that pen, like, I can't believe he thought he would get away with that.
Yeah, I've watched it multiple times. I come back to it sometimes because it's just this weird example of someone that's so starved for attention, and they are willing to go to the most obscene ends to produce a scene. Like, I don't understand. And that's a unique instance of watching someone just crash and burn. Like, he went deep into the ground.
What they say, the three beasts are money, fame, and power, and if you can overcome all three, you're a saint. But most people just can't handle either one of them, or two of them, or God forbid, three of them.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating too to watch some of the more reputable ufologists be forced to share the stage with people that are really controversial or accused of making shit up or being full of shit, because they're like, they get pushed into that weird place where they don't want to just generate controversy or throw people under the bus, like, in front of everybody, but at the same time people look to them for an educated perspective, whereas, like, down here, like, we're just casually having a conversation. I can easily just talk about Romanek crashing and burning. I feel like it's no skin off my back in it. I'm just some dude on the internet, so it feels like it's easier to talk about and more obvious.
Yeah. So another case, which I'm interested in, and I keep going back to look at this. You know, the case of the CARET, CARET. It's sort of like commercial applications for research into extraterrestrial technology, which is supposedly a sort of branch or shoot off of Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center. Do you know this one, Cougar Bait?
No, I'm not as familiar with this one.
Okay, all right. Well, it's basically like this. The story behind it is in California. I think there was just a UFO sighting and a photo in Lake Tahoe and a few other places around this within the same month. And the photos are, I don't find them that convincing, but they do show these very complex and intricate crafts that appear to be floating in the air. And so this guy, I think he just called himself Isaac. He wrote into Coast to Coast AM, you know, this radio station that pretty much talk about anything. And he said he claimed to be this sort of whistleblower from this research project. So he was like a Silicon Valley guy, but a physics guy in Silicon Valley, I think. And he got recruited to this project and went in and started working or started the training. And like, yeah, so by the way, you'll be reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. And it's like, huh? And they worked on these, according to the story, they worked on these objects with this gravity controlling technology. So like anti-gravity technology. And when you, this device, it looks something like a weird sci-fi engine, and these two pieces on either side, like, or one on either side, like I-beams. But when you activate the engine, these things snap into place and they're fixed in the air, which years later, I saw that footage from Tel Aviv University where they do the quantum locking. Are you guys familiar with that? No, well, they do this. They call it quantum locking or quantum levitation. So it's where they have they get a superconductor and they get a very strong magnet, and they place the magnet above the superconductor, and it will be fixed in place at a certain height, and it's levitating. And you can watch the videos. It's very interesting because they push this thing around and it just goes right around the track like a maglev train or something. It's quite fascinating technology. Anyway, it was interesting because that's something confirmed and real. There's something real scientists are working on, and it kind of echoed what Isaac was talking about in these documents. And it's also the CARET documents are very interesting. I mean, they have some pictures, and they have what appears to be an alien script or alien language written on these objects. According to Isaac, these are sort of like a programming language or analogous to a programming language. When you put the right code onto an object, the object itself is made up of these tiny, like nanocomputers. And when you put them all together, they have this nonlinear growth in processing power. So it's like this, he describes the material as holographic. So you can take any one piece of it and it will function independently. But when you put a bunch of these particles together, they function together. Nobody has been able to determine where the script comes from. So it looks like the script from the Matrix. It looks like, what is it, hiragana, I think, or katakana, I'm not sure which, from Japanese, but it's not really the same. So it seems to be a script which is either invented for the purpose of this story, or it's a genuine, unknown language. So it's an interesting thing because you can tell that this guy, if he's making the story up, he obviously has quite a lot of technical knowledge in any case, because he's talking about things that only someone with a technical mind would be able to invent. So it's really cool, even as a little science fiction story.
No, I can tell looking at it, like, even not just technical, but presumably you would have some design expertise, because
yes.
the sort of hieroglyphs are very detailed, and then the 3D
yes.
images are I mean, it looks like something that could easily be pulled out in Maya, but it's super,
Yes.
super intricate, right? It's not.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I haven't looked into it all. I'll look at it. I'm curious.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it looks more along the lines of what I think you would imagine something alien to look like.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whereas when people talk about just seeing like a blob in the sky, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
infinitely more frustrating because it still might behave irregularly, but like just looking at this thing, I have no idea what it could possibly be for, or how it would function the way you're describing
Yeah.
it. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Coast to Coast
Should
is
have
kind of
done
an
the
interesting
screen
catch-all
share
for a
lines.
lot of
Yeah.
different people's stories.
Sorry, that they're science fiction stories or what?
No, just people sort of sharing. No, I'm not saying like true or not. Just Coast to Coast has attracted quite a few people.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I missed it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say we're probably talking about like different species too when we get into the whole alien thing. Like, you know, just like there's like, I don't know, different animal species, and you know, humans are technically one, you know, from the animal kingdom. I think aliens would probably be a little bit different. Like we talked about the Anunnaki, who are supposed to be these giants. But then when we talk about the aliens that you meet when you're doing DMT, they're like tiny little green things. And then of course we have all the cultural stuff of like, you know, the gray aliens and the big eyes and like Roswell type characteristics, etc. So I don't know.
I can tell you. I can just share the sort of the table that David Jacob presents. There's and this is consistent amongst other accounts or experiences that I've read. The most common are some form of gray, right? So they're the big-headed, large almondy eyes. Usually they're completely black and tiny slits for mouths. They're very robotic, like they don't talk. It's only telepathic generally. And then there's a weird spectrum of that from the gray to sort of actually human. So there's like half, and then like just really, really human-like, but still obviously a gray. And then beyond that, it sounds like I mean, people talk about reptilians, all form of like serpent-like features, but some consistency where they have like cat-like eyes and no masculine or feminine, it seems, although they're very aggressive and it seems very malevolent usually. And then beyond that, the insectoids, which are basically like these giant praying mantises. I think when I first heard about it, I thought were kind of strange and fascinating why you would single out that particular form, but that one's oddly consistent amongst the reports that I read, which doesn't say that it gives it any necessarily legitimacy, because you know, if we're going to talk about the cultural aspects of the phenomena, it's hard to tell what people would pull from sort of the ethos surrounding ufology if they do that. But I don't see a lot of people doing the aggregate research and then establish, like there aren't that many people that I think that have a table where they're classifying the particular species without a lot of blinky text or, you know, having it hosted on GeoCities or something. Jacob is the only person I've found that's done it that way so far, and those are the general three kind of species. There is another one that's very much human-like that people generally equate to some form of Nordics. I don't know where the term came from, but they're always where it came from originally. I guess they're always blonde-haired and blue-eyed and very, very, very beautiful. And most of the ones I read, they're generally benevolent, but also some form of like super advanced human, essentially. But those are just catch-alls. Like I don't think I guess I don't personally find the idiosyncrasies of the species as interesting as what their drives seem to be, or if there are consistencies on like what are they doing to that particular person, or what does that person think that they're doing to them and why they're interacting with them, whether it seems completely accidental, whether it's just completely strange, like if you're talking about like Whitley Strieber, it doesn't make any sense, or Karla Turner, like they're just evil tricksters, like they're they're just trying to terrorize a person to no end, for no reason, their entire family following them all over. Or there's some sort of program, if I'm reading Jacob's work, like there's a really specific set of experiments and procedures that they all go through, which is strange. I think they're all equally confounding. That's the weird thing. It's hard to draw some correlations, I think, unless you're finding people like Jacobs. So I guess that's where I put a lot of my resources, is looking for those kind of people that are doing that kind of work.
Yeah. So you said his book is called Walking Among Us. So is that the thesis of his book, that there are like extraterrestrials everywhere and we just don't recognize them, or is that referring to something else?
Yeah, the main, I mean, I haven't finished it. The main purpose of the program that these abductees are a part of is for the other beings to create a hybrid. He calls them hybrids because they look completely human. They have alien DNA, and integrate them seamlessly into general civilization. So there are like, there's a whole spectrum. There's a distinct spectrum of relationships and roles that the abductees fulfill along that trajectory. So they would either, be supplying the genetic material or caring for the hybrids, because there are beings in the intermediary genetic stage where they're kind of half and half, caring for them as children, teaching them how to function as humans, or if they're hybrids, teaching them how to operate in human society directly, or providing them some form of relationship. The nuances of that, I think, are vast, and I haven't quite fully got. But yeah, but the ultimate purpose of that, gone through that part of the book, there's like scant instances where someone is given the opportunity first to ask questions, and secondly, get some form of response. And all the responses are, in a few instances, just completely stonewalled. Like they just say that there will be some form of change that will happen soon. And the ultimate purpose of that program is completely unclear relative to the actual nature of what they're doing. Seems completely consistent across all the abductees. Like they're all the types of experiment. They're harvesting our genetic material and then using it to make copies of us that they've engineered, and then, oddly enough, putting them right back onto the planet for whatever purpose. Don't know. Haven't got to that part of the book yet. So I'm guessing he has some sort of hypothesis, but I'm not sure yet.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. No, it's very strange. Yeah, it's a very clear and direct style of writing. I appreciate it a lot. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I don't know if I'll go back and read some of his other books, but this is just his most recent one, and I had seen Richard Dolan do a video on it recently, and so I decided to pick it up. I just hadn't quite gotten to his work yet. I read a lot of Dolan, but kind of only recently did he start doing a lot of just video content and trying to interact more with his sort of audience. Have you read any books besides Kane's book, Kurt?
I don't think so. Other than, well, yeah, I read Strieber's Communion.
Okay.
And a little bit of his follow-ups to that. So that's an interesting book. Ariel, you might like that one because, Strieber goes through and he's having all these weird abduction experiences in the cabin in New York State and all this stuff, and interfering with his family. But he never takes a firm position about it. So he never says, absolutely, this happened to me. He never says, absolutely, this was a hallucination or anything like that. He's very skeptical of the experience, or he doesn't take any firm position all the way through the book.
I think he's really difficult because because I've seen him speak. I haven't read his books, but I've listened to a lot of interviews. I did read The Key, which is a separate experience he had with just one particular being.
Hmm.
He's a science fiction writer. He wrote novels, right? And he has this incredible experience, which he is then publicly, like, overwhelmingly ostracized for. Like, the whole idiom, my understanding of anal probes, comes from his story.
Yeah.
And there's him being on talk shows just getting ridiculed, and him being immensely triggered, trying to defend himself, but still sort of maintain that position, or he doesn't really know what it is. The trouble is he's made a lot of money telling his story, and I don't.
Yeah, eventually.
And in the period of communion, it's funny. Okay, so I remember, I've seen the movie with
Christopher Walken.
Christopher Walken, yeah, not Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins, that would be awesome.
Completely different movie. Well, it's strange when Christopher Walken, he makes a weird abductee too. He admits later on to drinking a lot during that period, which I think you could lend to someone that is just psychologically stressed, but it also, I think, devalues some of his general testimony. It still doesn't explain why the things happened the way he did, but I think him being a science fiction writer, it's too convenient, right? Like, it's difficult for me to pay too much attention to him, even though I've obviously, watched countless hours.
This with Philip K. Dick, also a science fiction writer, but he wrote, I mean, most of what he wrote wasn't actually for the public. Most of what he wrote was in his exegesis, and he wrote all this crazy stuff about what happened and everything, and the aliens contacting him through a red light or whatever. Or it's not even aliens; it's the Earth Spirit, Valis. So I don't think the fact of being a science fiction writer is here or there.
What's the most compelling extraterrestrial story that you guys have come across?
Compelling in the sense that it seems credible, or that it seems like
yeah, I mean, I would say one that you tend to think is true, not a science fiction story, because obviously science fiction stories are all extremely compelling, but one that you actually do believe is true, or there's enough evidence that it's true, or the person who told the story seemed very genuine, but like one of the more, I don't know, crazy interesting ones that you guys have come across.
Wow. I told you guys last week about that experience taking peyote and meeting extraterrestrials.
True.
So Cougar Bait, I'll tell you about that later if you're curious. But that was... I'd say that's definitely the most compelling for me, but I don't expect that to be compelling for anybody else, because to anybody else, it is a science fiction story. And
a psychedelic trip.
Yeah.
Which tends to discredit those experiences to the general public.
I suppose so. I'd say Bob Lazar is probably one of the best cases.
What's that one?
Bob Lazar, yeah.
What's that one?
Bob Lazar, he was supposedly, well, he was a physicist, I believe, and he claims to have worked in, what's it called? S4, which is a section just near Area 51. And so when he was working there, or just after he was working there, he still had this schedule of when they were doing these experimental test flights. So he would take certain people out there. You could see the footage. Obviously, the footage not that compelling, but who he had with him, he had, what's his name? Bill Lear, I think, son of the guy who invented the Learjet. And Bill Lear, over all these years, he still believes very firmly in what he saw. Like, what he saw was UFO, basically. There's no explanation for what he saw. And there's a bunch of stuff that Bob talks about, and all this stuff about actually seeing UFOs up close and even going inside one, and some, I think even some technical stuff that he talks about, which is interesting. So yeah, that is a very compelling case.
I think it. Unfortunately, I think it's the opposite. I think he's completely
bonkers.
So Lazar is problematic because it seems like he's still unable to substantiate some significant aspects of his background, not to mention his story. Because I think my understanding, it's still largely an anecdotal claim within the existence of particular programs. So I feel like other people have treated this better. So there's a good white paper by Michael Schratt called the Lazar Report from 2015, where he kind of goes through individually the claim and then the evidence presented. And I'll send that to you. I think that's the most concise presentation I've seen of the problems with Lazar. So the cool thing is that it's timely. So Jeremy Corbell just came out with a documentary this week that is just about Bob Lazar, and it's just about his story. I haven't watched it. Unfortunately, I don't like Corbell's style. I watched his last movie, The Hunt for Skinwalker, and I think he just kind of dances around it and gives you some fancy camera angles, and all the reviews I've read for it say that it doesn't present any new evidence. Lazar did do some interviews shortly following it, but he's still not addressing where, like, for example, he'll say he's gotten a degree from MIT, but there's no evidence that he has done that. He doesn't. Where my understanding is,
I don't really care about that. Like, I don't think that discredits, like, even if we say he absolutely lied about that, I don't think that changes.
It's difficult because first of all, why would you lie about it? And if we couldn't prove that you went to school to be a physicist at all, then we have to question, well, I mean, yeah, it's not as important as if you have the understanding of physics, but why are you lying for it? It is because it would I think it would make us think it is to try to substantiate some other story or evidence that you're presenting. The other things, like the sort of pay stubs that he shared from his time there are like some blatant inconsistencies in the documentation that he tried to provide. The white paper, I haven't studied it. I think I think the reason that it's remained popular is because it's difficult to soundbite the direct refutations of some of the things that he said. I've listened more to Stanton Friedman try to tear him down, and I've found some other researchers that have taken him down. But I think he remains one of the most controversial, but also the hardest to sort of push down people, other than Stephen Greer. I think there are two people. And Greer's a little different because he's done credible work, and he's not basing on it. None of it's all his personal testimony, but he has maintained a sense of cultural relevance in ufology, despite just completely destroying his reputation after the fact. Whereas Lazar has stayed out of the spotlight for quite a while, and he stopped doing interviews for many years. But a lot of the I put him in sort of the most one of the the controversial category. He's not. So And unfortunately, I think even his story only leads to the type of technology. Like, it's not. In his context, it was the government that was building the UFOs, right? So there's a particular narrative that's attached to it. It doesn't explain a lot of the other aspects of it.
So what would you say is the most compelling case?
God, it's difficult because I think I don't know if. So first of all, I haven't done any original research, and I think that. I would say I have some marks against my ability to even put forward what I think is credible, because I think anything that receives a significant amount of attention, due or undue, is sort of suspect. Like it, because I think there are things that are a form of limited hangouts where there's a sliver of truth to it, but 95% of it is bullshit. And so I think like the Majestic 12 documents are a good example of that. It's very difficult. You have to do a lot of research to tell what is real and what isn't, if it is. And even then, it's still difficult to communicate that. From what I feel are the more spotlighted cases, I'm pretty partial to Dan Sherman. He's a retired Air Force intelligence officer that was recruited when he was in the military for a program that he was then trained to perform a specific task that occurred in this very strange program where he was essentially communicating with extraterrestrials. And he has a very consistent background and story. So like he's able to substantiate that he was in the military, and just the way that he's presented his story, I felt is very genuine. Like he has given away his book for free for many years. You can just buy it now, but when I read it, it was just free on the internet. And this was like 15 years ago. But I think it's tough because it's still anecdotal. If I'm going to look at more, I think more specifically other people, I think that lend to larger aspects of the phenomenon. I think Karla Turner is probably one of the best. I think she wrote 2 books before she passed away. She got cancer. She became very outspoken and like a form of activist, like against the malevolent actions and manipulation that were being perpetrated on her by the orchestrators of the phenomena that she was experiencing. And she kept very detailed journals of her entire experience from the very beginning. And it wasn't just her, it was her entire family, and it sort of followed them. And it happened at a time when it was very difficult, I think, to find the resources to try to even find someone to talk to figure out what was going on. And so, whereas now it's difficult now because I think there's so many narratives that you can latch onto, and like I meet people that I feel like are very disingenuous, but telling me their personal story. Like I went to a convention recently, and I can see them pulling from these popular narratives, right? Whereas, like when I look at someone like Karla Turner, I just she sort of has the whole package. Like she did a lot of very detailed documentation of her personal experiences over a long period of time, and it completely took over her life, and she devoted herself to it fully. And I think Travis Walton is probably a good example, which I would assume most of you are familiar with. He's the fire in the sky guy, the logger that got supposedly taken aboard a craft and then disappeared for a while and then came back. I think he's pretty fascinating. I think it's slightly less credible because I think he's not very good at communicating his story, and he's made some mistakes along the way, like taking money for certain things. But I think he's still more credible than not, just in terms of telling his personal experience. I'm going to say credible witnesses. But those are those are the main ones that I'm the most familiar with. I feel like there are plenty of other cases that I've come across that I've experienced through other researchers, giving a very detailed overview, but it's usually from a very singular perspective because, not every case gets a multitude of perspectives or the amount of research that it really deserves if there's something credible there. And I still think even the most credible ones for anybody will be someone that they know personally or that they have direct physical contact with, so they can hear them talk about, because that's the easiest way to get a sense of a person's motivations than why they would possibly lie about it or what they would get out of telling their story. And some of that only comes from doing the research yourself and seeking it out, or being a crazy enough UFO guy that people see you reading a book and want to tell you their story for whatever reason. And that's usually pretty compelling when it happens, but it's kind of fascinating. Like I can't immediately transcribe those and then translate them to the to the extent of credibility that I would then want to present someone else. So yeah, so I did a couple talks at Burning Man, and had a few people share a few stories, because it was I just held a few general UFO talks where I tried to have conversations with everybody, not as much me read from a script, give a lecture, because I'm not actually that, I'm not an expert. And there's some people told some fascinating stories, and they were just as confounding and had that big asterisk at the center of them that I would expect, and they were then drawn to the people that were trying to figure out the phenomena as well. I don't have any personal
Sorry, when you say an asterisk at the center, you mean like something unexplained or what?
Yeah, I was just kind of referencing the way I phrased it earlier, where a UFO, it's something that we don't know. Like if there's a variable at the center of it, so no idea what that
X factor or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then I even had someone in my own family that came to me many years after their experience, and only after seeing me read a book about it, kind of go into their story, and had some missing time. And I could tell it had very deeply affected them, because they didn't have anyone really to help them translate the experience, even though there were other people there that experienced it with them. So, seeing how that affects someone emotionally over time, even just in like a broader social context, like whether the fact that this thing happened to you was validated or not can be very traumatic. Like if we all saw, Bugs Bunny appear and like do an amazing show for us, and then everyone else in the room said that never happened, like I'd be very frustrated.
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of is along the same lines, and I hate to bring it up, it's so dark, but like rape cases, right? So women who come forward, a lot, like there's definitely a segment of them that might be doing it for attention or for revenge or for other purposes. But then, and that's like my biggest problem with like women who cry wolf, is then they discredit the women who it actually does happen to, that when they come forward, they are scrutinized and thought that they're crazy or that they're lying, et cetera, et cetera. And it is, that a lot of the time the evidence is only anecdotal, he said, she said kind of thing in court, instead of actual physical evidence of, sperm and struggle and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a very similar case with all of these other traumatic experiences that may be tied to UFOs and aliens, where somebody comes forward and then they're laughed and told that they're crazy, and that kind of perpetuates the trauma even further. And then there's the people who do it for the fame and money and to seem cool and be like, well, I know all about aliens and I've been abducted and look at me, kind of scenario.
Yeah, and I think fortunately anyone that even does a casual study of human behavior can sort of snuff out the most egregious instances of someone that's purely attention seeking.
Right.
Someone like Corey Goode, though, I think it is very difficult to tell. I think he's a good example of someone that I think Bob Lazar is a good example, because he's eloquent enough and intelligent enough, and his story is anecdotal enough that it's a perfect storm of some degree of abstraction and credibility, that it's, for the average person, that they're completely, like, they're utterly defenseless. Corey Goode, maybe a little more extreme example, because you can only get so far before someone talks about being age regressed or talking to 6-foot bird aliens, before you have to kind of be into that thing or question it severely. Whereas Lazar, much more grounded, like there are physical aspects, and he's going to predict an element exists, or talk about the nuances of some physical aspects of something that you need some background to even understand some of the implications of what he's saying. A little more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Cougar Bait, how did you get into this initially?
I was pretty interested in non-ordinary stuff, I think, from the beginning. I I think, for me, I think it was sort of a process of initially feeling like people had valid individual experiences that were, it's like spiritual experiences. So like, like there's a component to spiritual experiences that I think are comparable, where you see something fantastical that you can't explain, that doesn't translate to consensus reality. You're forced to then parse that and or express it to everyone else. Sort of like Flatland kind of game where, something just appears out of nowhere that's impossible, that gives you this profound knowledge or you have some relationship with. And in a spiritual context, there's a much usually broader meaning, and it's much more intimate and personal, and the implications can be much more profound and poetic. But I think just validating that can occur, and then trying to understand that our ability to process those experiences is very complicated and can be very confabulated or become conflicted with our own psychological makeup or cultural context. So then I guess I came across Dan Sherman's book, and because he was giving it away for free, it was very accessible, and it's very brief, and it was very matter of fact. It was someone just telling a series of events, and it wasn't a lot of flowery about it, but it was limited enough in scope. Like when I look at someone like Corey Goode, where his story has been made into a comic book, that's what I expect. I expect there to be a Michael Bay movie of it eventually. Whereas this was it just felt very matter of fact. That there were parts of it that were incredible and strange, but it piqued my interest enough to think, well, if this person's willing to put themselves on the line to this extent, in this way, are there other people? And then that was around shortly after Greer's Disclosure Project in 2001, where he sort of got a bunch of witnesses together, former military intelligence and other professionals or officials, and made sort of a presentation at the National Press Club in DC of all of them saying that they were willing to go on record, and them individually claiming what their, briefly claiming what their experience and knowledge and understanding was of the phenomena, and just sort of broadly legitimizing the whole phenomena. So seeing people just like speed dating, like just like one beat after another tell you, with a suit on, these are my credentials, this is my opinion, this isn't my opinion, like this is what I know, and I'm willing to go on the record. Was pretty compelling.
And they all said that they would state it before Congress, which would put them under, or if they ever did it, it would put them under penalty of perjury, which means they're risking their careers.
Yes, and I think especially people with some of those credentials, they're putting their whole reputation on the line. I thought, well, that's fucked up. Who the hell in their right mind would do that? And why is everyone taking them seriously? Like, why haven't I? I think the more I usually forget this one because I think it was more subtle to me, but I watched a lot of Unsolved Mysteries as a kid, and it was the 90s, right? So I couldn't TiVo it, but there was a UFO case in one of the shows, and it was a mother and her child who something hovered over their car, and they stopped, and when they got out, it was at night, and it was just them on the road. They got injured, like they got burns, and they had a really strange physical reaction to it that lasted for days afterwards. And the show was known for doing like really good recreations and stuff, and I thought, well, that's strange. But I didn't, 10 years went past that. I thought, well, that's strange. Like, so the individual context, like I wasn't ever, I was always in love with science fiction, but I wasn't necessarily super taken with, the Halo or, I love Star Trek, but I always kept those in the context of fiction. So beyond that, there's, after the Disclosure Project, it's sort of a can of worms. I think when you then try to spend time digging into the official, like studies done by the government, or if we're going to dig into the nuances of Project Blue Book or all of Alan Hynek's career when they're initially trying to study the phenomena, it's kind of complex. Like then you're just kind of studying it, and I think you're just kind of judged on how much you can regurgitate on a moment's notice or what you've put out there. as a researcher, and it's still like immensely varied, and there's a whole bunch of noise and charlatans kind of thrown in the mix. So, you know, like there's so many things that I've spent time on that I would never mention because they're either not worth mentioning or I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, no, I spent like a good 10 hours listening to that person talk, but I knew they were totally crazy. I just wanted to see how they would respond to trying to come up with that particular type of questioning, you know. And so the dude with the headband and the crystal in the middle, like going through hours of testimony. How you parse that? To me, that's more just trying to see how people, like, if there is some percentage of their experience that is objectively real, and then how they parse that and it completely blows into something else. Like, what I think is a good, maybe Romanek is a good example of that. But
do you kind of look at body language, like the telltale signs of somebody lying, like whether they're looking up to the right, or, you know, whether they have some kind of tell where you can see that they're bullshitting? Like, do you ever look at that aspect within these interviews?
Yes, but I know that it's not science. So, so for a long time, I was actually fascinated by projective psychological analysis. So, like, I would have everyone I would ever meet draw pictures of themselves and trees, and then I would keep in this giant book, and then afterwards, I wouldn't let them see anyone else's drawings. I would go through the book and I would talk about what people sort of expressed through their drawings that I felt correlated with the aspects of their personality. I know that's not exactly what you're talking about, but I think there's such an overwhelming subjective aspect to it. And there's a particular channel I watched where a woman who is versed in body language just sits there and analyzes videos that people request to her, and they're usually all politicians, or there's definitely some people that are in ufology, anything controversial or where people want to know the person is lying. And it's, even watching someone that's purely what they do, it's difficult to pick up a lot of the nuances, and I think it's not exact, and a lot of it's intuitive, and not stuff that you can necessarily do through a screen. I guess when I'm sitting with someone in a room, it's so much easier to tell because they're feeding off of my responses to them, right, you know, through my own body language, right? And so if I'm unconsciously or inaudibly invalidating their experience, they're going to pick up on that. Or if I want them to just stop and move on. But I haven't been in an overwhelming situation. I'm more usually trying to be an impartial observer and just get them to tell a story without, you know, trying to take over the room and, like, you know, get up on a stage or something.
Yeah, like micro analyze them.
Yeah, this particular woman bombards body language. She's not on YouTube anymore because she got removed for I think being too controversial. It had nothing to do with like how she was, you know, she wasn't doing anything necessarily wrong. But she's on DTube and BitChute, and it's still hard for me to find people that I feel can do that reliably or consistently, and it's time consuming, and it's not, I don't think it translates well empirically. So yeah, I think ideally we're all doing that all the time, and we're paying attention to each other, but you know, I think anyone that has an incredible story is eventually going to be put under some spotlight, and they're either going to start to show some cracks, or they're going to be like Goode, where they are like, it's just absolutely fascinating to watch that guy presumably just lie like out of his brain, like just thing after thing, and I don't understand how either that's possible or he's able to lie that well. And so I'm just I'm not endlessly fan of him. I watched an hour of him. I've seen him speak, you know, but I'm like, well, I just want to kind of stay away from it because there's so much noise to it. I think it's dangerous to get too invested in something that incredible.
Yeah. Do you think we should wrap up, guys?
Sure.
Yeah, we're going on 2 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. Here, I'll do. Go ahead.
I have one last question, I guess. If somebody did want to start going down the rabbit hole of UFO research and alien abductions and all that stuff, where would you, Cougar Bait, recommend people kind of start to go on a more credible research path and not all of a sudden accidentally get stuck in the sci-fi realm and kind of start creating biases from that? But like, where would they start to get credible information?
Sure. So I have a website called letstalkufos.com, and it's my direct response to that question. So I tried to find in aggregate the best, most credible cases, and there's only a few of them, but I sort of repeated that across every aspect of the field. So who are the most relevant and credible researchers, past and present, experiencers, who are the most controversial people, who are the hoaxers, and then what are the best online resources, books, documentary, all that jazz. Everything on there, I think that is the most effective way I've been able to present sort of a top level view of the whole rabbit hole and phenomena, because it's still pretty scant. Like I just did a post this week on the biggest online community in the subreddit for UFOs, trying to find other good websites, and there aren't a lot that are really well organized or designed. Like there's a good UFO wiki with a few thousands of articles, independent of Wikipedia, and there are some good resources, but they're not necessarily well designed. It's still difficult to tell. It's not presented in like a concise or broad overview sort of format. So I'm being incredibly biased, right? Obviously, by recommending my own resource. I'm not making any money off of it, nor do I intend to. There's no ads there. The best specific avenue I would say is Kane's book, because you need to read about this. I think there need to be footnotes in whatever you're taking in, and she takes a very strong and consistent journalistic approach. Like I don't think the word alien appears in that book even.
Okay.
Did
Or
you
extraterrestrial.
say the extraterrestrial hypothesis? That's a phrase that's included in there.
Yes. And even then she's not necessarily focusing on it, even when she is the one writing. She's getting a lot of the officials or people involved in those things to write chapters in the book, and she's covering some of the best cases historically as far as their impact and credibility. I'd say that's the best, because you need to have some basis that the phenomena is worth investigating, and that there are credible people involved, and that we are looking at something that we genuinely can't explain in a lot of contexts. And then you can move on to what are the hypotheses, what are the things to look out for. That's the best book I'd recommend. But yeah, those two things.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate people who aggregate information, like you and like Mark Passio, and do the really heavy lifting for the rest of us, so that we can go to, one place and kind of see all of the information out there, and then discern for ourselves which we think is disinformation, which we think is information, what is true, what is not, etc. I mean, that's extremely helpful. Like I said, UFOs is not something that I really research too much, because honestly, I just don't know where to start. So I guess I'll be starting your website, and we'll link it below for the rest of you guys.
Great.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, guys. If you want to stay on a call after I stop recording for a minute, I'll just do a quick conclusion. Thanks everyone for listening and for getting through these 2 hours with us. It was super interesting. Thanks for everyone who spoke today. All the links from this conversation will be below. And if you still haven't gotten your ticket to Anarchapulco and you're planning on going, check out the description. We have an affiliate link where you get 10% off, and 10% goes to us. So that will be mutually beneficial if you're into it. Bye, everyone.
Bye.